Hi, I'm Lana Seiler, licensed clinical social worker, and this is Therapy Unboxed. I'm a clinician at All Points North Lodge in Colorado, and I wanted to do this show as a learning opportunity for people who are in the behavioral health field, as well as anyone interested in these topics. Informed consumers are good consumers. In each episode, I'll focus on a behavioral health topic, which will include things like theories, modalities, diagnoses, concepts, and even some clinical terms to get a more thorough understanding of them. I'll usually start with a general definition of the topic, maybe go over a brief history and some common misconceptions. I love to learn, and I'm not an expert in everything, so I'm really excited that we have expert guests on from time to time. I'll wrap up the show with some takeaways, key points. Join me and my expert guests as we unbox therapy from the inside out. So we're going to talk about burnout. Burnout's been around forever, and it's not something that I think we've really looked at as a legitimate thing until more recently, obviously COVID, but I think even before that, we've started to pay more attention. I know a lot of employers have started to develop more robust employee assistance programs, and I've noticed big companies are starting to have things like, quiet spaces for people to go and sit and meditate and breathe. And we have, things called mental health days now, right? Which weren't always a thing. So I feel like we are starting to kind of acknowledge more as a society that burnout exists. And when we look at how we operate, especially in this country, it's not surprising that people start to experience burnout in a range of jobs and professions. A couple of misconceptions that I've come across about burnout, and I've even thought myself, are things like, unless you're in like a really incredibly taxing field like first responders or working in a hospital, that, you don't deserve to have burnout, or burnout isn't a thing for you. Also that, maybe it's all in your head, that if we just practiced, better time management, we wouldn't have burnout, or that, you have to be kind of like working for a long time to experience burnout, or if you're experiencing something like that, you're not a team player. These are things that I think, unfortunately, and tend to counteract. Like, if we're working on a team and we want to feel like a team player, and that means that we never say no to anything, what ends up happening oftentimes, I've found and heard from people, is that our production and productivity actually goes down, and we end up, suffering, some health consequences from being exhausted. So in this episode, I'm going to go through a little bit of what I found on burnout when I did a little bit of research, and mainly really what I've heard, what I've experienced myself, because I think this is something we need to talk about more, especially in mental health and behavioral health, since this is the topic of this show, but it absolutely is broad. And I think anybody listening, whatever field you're in, this would probably be applicable, because it's not only is it a really hard time for us as a world and a nation, but it's there are some pros and cons to being in America, which is an incredibly innovative and hardworking country. And we can talk a little bit about how burnout fits into that, and how we can still do our best and be proud of what we do and work really hard, but not work ourselves into sickness. So I pulled some just basic signs and symptoms of burnouts from helpguide.org. I thought it was, they organized it really well. And so I'm going to go through these just because I think we also don't really know always what the symptoms are. And it's helpful to be able to kind of pick out what might be contributing to us feeling burnout out, and also what burnout looks like for us, so we can work on addressing it. Some of the so again, I think we can get kind of caught up in thinking that it's just mental and psychological, but really, this whole mind-body business is a real thing. And so we definitely experience physical symptoms, things like feeling tired and drained all the time, lowered immunity, frequent illnesses, frequent headaches or muscle pain, change in appetite or sleep habits are just a few. Some people experience chronic headaches. If we have some underlying condition, sometimes that can flare up because we're just worn out, tired, drained. The emotional signs and symptoms are things like feeling a sense of failure and self-doubt, loss of motivation, feeling helpless, trapped and defeated, increasingly cynical and negative outlooks, detachment, feeling alone in the world, decreased satisfaction, and decreased sense of accomplishment. So feeling like even though we're doing our best and working hard, we're not really accomplishing anything or getting anywhere. And then behaviorally, we can start to withdraw from our responsibilities, withdraw from our friends, use food, drugs, promiscuous sex, alcohol, risky behaviors to cope, taking your frustrations out on family members, friends, or support system, procrastinating, taking longer to get things done, skipping work, coming in late, leaving early. So I think, this whole list, we can go back and kind of go through them a little bit more in depth, but I think, I myself can relate to a lot of these, have been able to relate to a lot of these over my career. And I know for me, I've often tried to attribute it to other things. I have a headache because I didn't drink enough water. I'm not feeling well because I'm not eating right, or I didn't get enough sleep. But when I actually look at it, sometimes when I've had burnout, I'm tired even when I've gotten 8 or 9 hours. I mean, it isn't about the amount of sleep we're getting. Good self-care is really important, but I think this topic is huge because we can attribute this stuff to other things, feeling like it can't be about the job. It can't be about my performance, because a lot of us, this is a tiny separate topic, but a lot of us identify with our careers so heavily because we have performance-based esteem, right? We have other-based esteem. We look at our value and worth based off how much we can contribute, how much we're making, are we in line for promotions? And while all of that is important, and I'm not going to sit here and deny that income and our position in our jobs is not an important part of life, it is. But when we have so much of who we are and how we feel about ourselves in relationship to the world wrapped up in our careers, it can cause us to have some pretty significant denial about whether we're actually feeling burned out. And I think this is something that needs to change. And the more we change in our own lives individually and talk about this stuff freely, I think the more we can start to change the culture. So one of the other potential components of this that's interesting to look at is, where are we in terms of like a generational evolution, right? So burnout has existed since the inception of work, I'm sure, right? But we haven't really looked at it as a thing until recently. I think it could easily be seen as like other things, like a moral failing or an internal weakness in people. And I think we might have had more of a tendency to do that in previous generations before we, as a whole, have learned more about mental health, psychological health, behavioral health, and even our physical health and wellness, more along the lines of preventative medicine and keeping ourselves well physically. I mean, we've done a great job in this country of being reactive and addressing things after they come up. So, I wouldn't want to be in a major accident in any other country in the world but here, right? Because we're really good at that, like emergency medicine and innovation. Are we great at wellness? Not so much. I think we're starting to pick up on that more robustly, but it's not something, this preventative, preemptive care is not something that we've done great, I don't think. And I think that's a big contributing factor to burnout too. So when we look at previous generations and the way that they viewed taking time for yourself, right? And I don't know, this isn't true for everybody, but it could be said that maybe there's more shame attached to it before, a little less acceptance a little more of like, oh, are you okay? Or can you do this? Are you up to the task? Did I pick the wrong person for this job? Which can be really scary to hear, right? Because we can feel super judged and I know, listen, this isn't specific to certain generations. I feel that way too sometimes when I need to take a day for myself. It's like, what am I going to tell people? And even though I know consciously that, of course, I should be able to take a mental health day for myself to kind of just regroup if I need to. But there's that, right? There's this, it's not always about your executive function conscious thoughts. We have these like deep messaging. We have the deep beliefs. And one of my core beliefs is, I have to always say yes and perform and be the best. And so if that's one of my core beliefs, then it's going to be really hard for me to say, hey, I need to take a day. And I don't think I'm alone in that. And so I think it's important for us to kind of have this self-awareness to recognize what's coming up and whether it came from our parents, that came from their parents, that came from their parents, or whether it came from previous bosses or work experiences. Those messages are in there and they kind of stand in the way of us being able to just kind of come out and be proud, like, hey, I'm going to take care of my mental health, right? It's tough. So that's something interesting to kind of look at and maybe think about in terms of where are we getting these messages? Where did they come from? Are they still serving us? Are they still serving our workplace? Can we be an agent of change? And the other thing I was thinking of about burnout is, we're in a time right now where it's unprecedented really in the world with COVID. And burnout is rampant in, the essential worker population, people who have to go to their jobs. We have a new sort of rise now of Omicron or whatever variant is going on. And I think as much as we are kind of getting used to dealing with when we get these surges and all these different industries, there's still this sense for a lot of essential workers of, I have to show up. If I don't show up, people aren't going to get the care they need. If I don't show up, people aren't going to get the services they need. And so we're looking at that population having enormous rates of burnout. And is there an answer right now? I don't know. That's the other question is we are in a time where people do have to show up and get to work to take care of people because there's so much shortage in staff. And so some of this may be, how do we do harm reduction? How do we do damage control? What practices can essential workers put in place, even though they do have to show up to their jobs and it is taxing and it is draining? What can you do when you get home? What can you do before you go to work? And we can go over some of those ideas too. But I also don't want to leave out the people who aren't essential workers, who are at home, working from home, or maybe not working right now, but feeling burned out from the cycle of COVID repeating, having these different outbreaks. And is it going to happen next winter? And worrying about finances and worrying about their families and families in different parts of the world. I mean, I think it would be unfair for us to say that population or that this group of people don't experience any form of burnout, because that feeling of helplessness, hopelessness, I kind of describe it as like an exhausted apathy. That exhausted apathy, I think, applies to all of us in different ways. So anybody listening who maybe isn't working right now, I think you're a part of this too, because that's really tiring and exhausting to feel like I'm not contributing to society. I'm not contributing to my family. How can I get back to work? What can I do to be helpful? It's in our human nature, I think, for most of us to want to be productive and to be a part of. And people who are stuck at home with, in isolation, even if they're with their families, can still feel, I think, a big sense of disconnection and not a part of society, which is draining. It's exhausting. We're social creatures. We're designed to work together. So I wanted to make sure that I put that out there, that however you're experiencing this is okay and right and valid. And so I think the coping skills that, I have some ideas, but I mean, the coping skills that we all have been trying to learn and hone and use for ourselves are just really important to kind of keep up with. And I also wanted to talk about, different ways that burnout can show up that maybe wasn't in our list, right? This was a great list and it's a good start, but again, we're all different. We all experience this stuff differently. And I know for myself, some of the ways that it shows up for me is like feeling like I don't have a second. I don't have a second to breathe. I don't have a second to just slow down. You have your cup of coffee in the morning and maybe you have 3 or 4 throughout the day. And it's like, well, this is just what I've got to do to get through. Or, and I'm interested to hear if anybody else has ways that burnout shows up for you. Those are some of the ways it shows up for me. And I've heard from a lot of colleagues, and friends that burnout shows up for them in different ways. Things like feeling like you can't even say, I'm not feeling great today, or I have a headache, or, I'm having an off day. Feeling like we can't even say those things for fear of, being judged or being looked at like you're not capable. So I think this goes across like many of the healthcare and essential worker sort of population, is that, right, if we aren't feeling great, but we don't have COVID, or if we're not feeling great, but we're not in as bad of shape, I guess, to put it crudely, as the people we're serving or working with, then we don't have, justification or validation to even mention that. And I also wanted to talk about, in this article that I was reading, which was really, really great, it mentioned burnout being different from stress. So one of the misconceptions too is that burnout is stress. And I think just like stress isn't necessarily trauma, stress isn't necessarily burnout. Stress is something that we all experience in our jobs, in our lives. It can make us stronger. It can help us grow. And whereas stress is sort of a feeling of quote unquote too much, burnout is a feeling of quote unquote not enough. And I thought that distinction was really interesting, because what it speaks to is feeling depleted and feeling empty, feeling like we don't have anything else to give, feeling like we can't really make a change. And when we're working in difficult systems, so I want to also kind of honor those people who are working in difficult systems like child welfare, the criminal justice system, healthcare, where we're doing the best we can, but it's just, these systems aren't perfect and they have their flaws. And people who are working in them day in and day out, I think, can feel this sense of minuteness. I'm just one tiny piece in this giant system that's functioning in a way that isn't the most helpful or isn't the most efficient because of a million different reasons, right? And so this feeling of I'm not enough, I don't have enough to give, feeling sort of lost and swept up. And I loved that, because that identifier, because it really helped me relate even more to my own feelings of burnout, and relating to my colleagues and the people that I work with and their sense of burnout is sometimes this feeling of like, is what I'm doing making a difference? I can only help the person in front of me. I can only do the job that's in front of me. Is it really making a difference? Another interesting component of this too, which I see a lot in different industries, is that we don't always get the full picture. So a lot of times jobs are broken up and broken down into, I'm doing this part of the job and the next person is doing that part of the job. And we don't always see the outcome, the end. I can speak for myself in behavioral, mental, and emotional health care, and that sometimes I do. Sometimes I see my patients have these great breakthroughs, or I get a thank you card, which makes the job worthwhile, that all that wonderful stuff. But oftentimes I don't. Oftentimes, I see a person for the beginning of their treatment experience, and then they go to a different level of care, step down to IOP, go to outpatient therapy, and I don't always see the fruits of the labor. I don't always see that seed that we've planted get to grow and bloom. And I think that's true in a lot of industries. We don't always see the good that we're doing, or the piece of the bigger picture that we're contributing to. And that can sometimes make us feel insignificant. And so when we put all that together, it's no surprise that we're kind of coming together and having this shared experience of feeling not enough, feeling empty. And so it's an important conversation to talk about what do we do about that. Okay, so I want to talk a little bit about things to do to help. I can speak for myself, some of the things I've been doing. I can speak to some of the things I've heard from colleagues and read about. Before I do that, because it's related, I want to say I also heard a really wonderful description of the visceral feeling of being soul tired. And soul tired is, to me, a different feeling than being brain tired or body tired, right? Kind of going back to that, I got 8 hours of sleep. I got 9 hours of sleep. Why am I exhausted? I feel like I'm getting everything done. Why do I feel like I'm so, behind and not doing what I'm supposed to be doing, right? That's to me like the difference is like this deep, deep soul exhaustion that you can't really account for with what's right in front of you. So what do we do about soul tired? And I think the answer to that question is maybe taking a deeper look at what fills our souls up. Since burnout is a feeling of not enough or lack of or empty or depleted, I think what we're looking for in how to combat it is what do we do to fill up our cup, fill up our soul. And as a behavioral health worker and mental health worker, I heard a lot about that in graduate school. A lot of my professors were talking about you need to fill your cup up before you can help anybody else, self-care. And I don't know, I'm sure other people can relate. In graduate school, I was like, guns blazing, nothing's going to stop me. I don't even need self-care. The work is going to fill me up because I'm helping people and it's so rewarding. And, just that very like right out the gate feeling and attitude, which I could coast on for a while, to be honest. But now I understand what they're talking about. You can't coast on it forever, no matter how many people you're helping, no matter how much good you're really doing. We still need to be mindful of our depletion. So what fills us up? I can speak for myself, things like being in nature and not just going for a walk with the mindset of like, oh, I'm going to get my steps in today. Or, oh, I need to go for a walk because it's like the next task on my list. But going for a walk in nature and really trying to leave all of that home or at work and using things like 5 senses to bring us into the moment. So slowing down, what does it feel like to be walking? Is it rocky? Is it sandy? What is the air temperature? What time of year is it? What time of day is it? Bringing in, noticing the smells, noticing the sights, the sounds, and kind of really just, for me, it's connecting to my animal self being in nature, right? So giving, I'm a person executive function piece of me a bit of a break and kind of just walking around on this planet as a part of it. I think we can feel really separate as humans with big brains, but we're not really that separate. And I think it's helpful for us to kind of put that down for a little bit and just go deeper and connect. So that's one of the things that helps my soul fill up. Other things are like being creative, and creative is broad. I feel like I'm being creative when I'm baking. I feel like I'm being creative when I'm taking care of my plants and gardening. We can break out some paints and pencils and be creative in that way. Finger painting is always great, gets us kind of out of being, an adult, quote unquote. But creativity comes in all kinds of forms. We're creative when we sing. We're creative when we dance. So getting in touch with that spontaneous side, when I do work with people with their family of origin issues, a lot of times we look at wounding that we have around different parts of kind of the nature of the child, which one of them is spontaneity. It's very easy for us in childhood to get wounding around spontaneity because our parents get embarrassed if we break out in song and dance in the middle of, dinner out. And so then we get shamed for it. And that's just one example, and that's a whole other podcast for another day. But spontaneity and creativity, I think, are really important parts of combating that feeling of soul tired. So one of the things that I think is important to talk about too is that in our day and age right now, our society right now, we have a lot of technological outlets. We have TV, we have social media, we have YouTube, we have internet. And I think we can have a tendency to maybe overuse those as ways to kind of fill the time and ways to de-stress. While, social media is great. We can keep in touch with friends and family. The internet has revolutionized our entire planet. And TV can also be, I don't like to shame people for binge watching, but mix it up, right? Maybe technology isn't the only way to cope, because it does keep us in that sort of really separate, I'm a person, I'm a human sort of space where if we can break out of that and sort of get into those more tactile, playful, energetic, creative outlets, it helps us to kind of fill up the parts of us that get depleted. Because I think when we're talking about soul tired and we're talking about a depleted cup, we're not talking about our brains are empty, right? It's different. It's a different feeling. It's that deep feeling. And so filling up that deep feeling, we need to go further than a screen. Play with the kids, play with the dogs, the cats, breathe fresh air, right? These are the things that help us get past screens and help us fill up in a deeper way. So maybe it's just we need to be mindful when any of our coping strategies become problems, including binge watching, becoming another task on the list. I have to get through this episode. I have to get through this series. What's the next one? What are people watching? Who out there has, the next good show? That kind of a thing can become part of the problem. But I think a lot of our sort of like go-to knee-jerk reaction coping strategies can become tasks. So even something like, baking or canning can become like a task on the list. So I think, one of my friends who's not a therapist or anything, but she's just incredibly wise, always tells me it's not what you do, it's why you do it. And so I think this is a time where we can examine that too. Why am I doing this? Am I doing this because it makes me feel good? Am I doing this because I said I would and I feel like I need to? Am I doing this because it's another task on the list? Am I doing this to look good for other people? And these questions are really, I think, a huge self-exploration journey that can increase our insight. We're the only ones who really know, right? I can't tell anybody else that this coping strategy may not be working well for them. It's really up to us. I mean, we can see, right? Like if somebody is, or someone close to us is maybe coping in a way that's not super healthy, but really like the most important, the most powerful is when we are able to feel that for ourselves and ask ourselves these hard questions. And it develops insight, and insight's always good. The more we know about ourselves, the more we can challenge ourselves, the more we can admit when we're wrong or that we need to change direction. I think the healthier we are as individuals, and it's a sign of personal growth. It's a sign of maturity, honestly, to be able to take a hard look in the mirror and say, why am I doing this? Do I need to do something different? Self-care is not about bubble baths all the time. I talk about this in trauma-informed leadership. Self-care is about asking ourselves hard questions. Self-care is about cutting things out that aren't helpful or healthy anymore, even though it's really hard to do at times. Self-care is about challenging toxic relationships. It's about sometimes doing the really, really hard things, because that's what sometimes we need to take care of ourselves, just like we would do that to take care of somebody else. Takeaways, I'm thinking, one, taking a look at some of the signs and symptoms that we talked about, or that I talked about on this episode. Is this a real thing for you? And if it is, let's not be in denial about it. Let's not ignore it, right? So maybe doing a little self-assessment. These are the things I try to do, right? Like honest, fearless self-assessment. And then that doesn't have to be the end of it, right? Like determining that maybe I am feeling burned out, maybe I am feeling empty is the beginning. And then moving into, what do I need to do? Do I need to start working with a therapist? Do I need to increase my sessions? Maybe if I'm seeing somebody every other week, maybe I move it to every week. Maybe I move it to twice a week. Do I need to have time in the day where I don't have to do anything? Do I need to have time in the day where I need to do more things? And also taking away these like misconceptions of being like a workhorse at your job, being a team player at your job. We're redefining this stuff now, you know, I mean, yes, contribute. Yes, be a part of. Yes, do your best work. Yes, we want to feel fulfilled. We want to feel productive. But is it still helpful to have these sort of can't say no office mentalities and job mentalities? So maybe just re-examining some of that stuff. Again, I think we can really be agents of change in our workplaces, and we can do it in a way that doesn't land us on like, you know, the blacklist. We can do it in a way that's just really kind of talking to people about how to increase our productivity at our jobs by being more mindful of these things. So those are some of the takeaways for me. And if anybody else has any takeaways or ideas, I'd love to hear about it. Thanks for listening to Therapy Unboxed with me, Lana Seiler. Subscribe and tune in each week for new episodes. For more information and resources, check out apn.com/podcasts. For questions about the show or anything we talked about, email us at pod@apnlodge.com. That's POD@apnlodge.com.